fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. I'm so excited you're joining me today because I'm here with Pete and Mark. What's up, gents?
Hey guys, or Voltron, is that what we called it?
Voltron. Yeah, Voltron's better than Captain Planet.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here, y'all. And for those of you listening to this podcast, you're probably listening to it while we're still enrolling for our Unicorn Society group. And so, by all means, if you want to learn more about working with us assholes on a regular basis, go to businessofunicorns.com and apply to join Unicorn Society. I think you probably only got, by the time this podcast will come out, probably only another few more weeks before enrollment closes. And so go jump on that shit, my friends. Let's talk about today's topic. Today, we got a question. Let me see. Who was this question from? From a listener. So thank you, dear listener. This was a question from Eric Waggle. Eric asks, compiling a team using emotional intelligence, how to do it, and how to maintain it. So this question is about how to hire and develop a team that has some emotional intelligence. I guess we should probably start for our listeners who may be not familiar with that term, emotional intelligence, giving a little background. I'm happy to get this party started since I love this topic. So emotional intelligence, it's, in short, people call it, EQ. So similar to intellectual intelligence, this is emotional intelligence. And really the definition I'd provide for this is the ability to both manage and understand your own emotions and to manage and understand the emotions of others. How do you use emotional information to navigate your own experience and how you use the emotional information from other people to navigate those relationships? So it's, how aware are you of the emotional landscape of your own life and the emotional landscape of others? And how do you use that information thoughtfully to develop relationships? Does that feel like a good enough working definition? Are we on the same page here? Yeah. So I guess the question is, I'll kick it to you first, Fisher, is, how do you think about hiring people, finding staff and developing staff that have high EQ, that have high emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I wish I had a very good model for this that was very replicable. I can't say offhand. I'm curious to hear if any of you all have anything to offer by way of a particular SOP other than it seems the entire interview process, that's what we're screening for. And I can't say necessarily I'm asking in that term, does this person have emotional intelligence? But particularly because we're in a service business, whether you're front facing or even doing more administrative stuff, you'll still be working with the team. And there is something to be said for how personable, how warm is this individual. And admittedly, the thing that I think is easy to pick up on quickly, which is interesting and very particular shade, but not the only part of the game, is someone immediately personable, warm? Can they make a connection quickly? Sometimes that individual, however, is not actually always super adept at like reading the room and understanding their impact on others. They maybe can't on a regular basis really regulate their own emotions in a way that prevents them from lashing out if they're having a dysregulated moment and they can't stop themselves from acting on impulses that could be destructive or fall into the label of toxic. So interestingly enough, I'd be curious to hear and kind of throw it back to you, gentlemen, because I don't think I have a thing for the interview process. I would say perhaps longtime listeners of this podcast know that we focus on behavioral interview questions, which is to say we ask about specific times rather than hypothetical. And certainly, I would say this, I don't know if this qualifies under emotional intelligence, but the questions which I ask, I wouldn't say that they're traps per se, but oftentimes, as an example, if I'm asking a question about a time you had a conflict with a previous boss and it is lost on you that as a future boss, it will be a little bit of a turnoff to me if you just start ranting and raving about what a jerk this person was, if you're personally taking no accountability in it. This person was a jerk. I was amazing. Not that they would say it in as many words. And I can understand someone might be trying to paint themselves in a good light through the story of how perfect they were with this person being a jerk. For me, that sends the wrong message. That's not what I'm looking for. I don't know if that qualifies as emotional intelligence, but that's, I guess, the way that I think about it. I'm curious. I don't know if that's the most operational thoughts. So I'm hoping you gentlemen can do better than I can with it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. What about you, Pete?
Yeah, Mark, that specific example speaks to me. There's a food service provider in my area who, for all of the time I've known him to be in business, he cannot hold on to an employee. And every single time I walk into his space and I ask him, how are things, he needs to tell me how hard it is to find good work and how nobody's got a real work ethic anymore. And he does this in front of his team, who he then belittles and micromanages and treats like complete garbage. And I vowed a couple years ago just not to give him my business anymore, because I can't handle just how emotionally unintelligent he is and how dismissive he is of other people's efforts, because the guy's just never made a mistake in his entire life as far as he's concerned. And I just don't have patience for it. For the topic, I guess I'll share with you guys the impetus of the conversation initially, or what we think might have prompted the question. I'll read you the tweet that I put up, and it might help me to elaborate on how I think about this. I said, emotional intelligence is the biggest differentiator between interns we hire and everyone else. Not the resume, not the GPA, and most definitely not a collection of certifications. Demonstrate that you can read people, adjust accordingly, and make friends. That's all I ask. So the way I think about this is, we give people a lot of opportunities to demonstrate, by people I mean interns, demonstrate their awareness of what's happening in the weight room beyond the program. And we open staff meetings with conversations about the client roster and give people an opportunity to say, so-and-so seems off, or I'm concerned about this client because of this conversation we had in the warm-up area. And to me, some of this is when an intern comes in and says, hey, I have a little concern about so-and-so. She was clearly emotional in the warm-up area today. And I'm wondering if you have any context or you have any tips for how I might handle that. And this is like in real time. They might still be in the gym. To me, that is emotional intelligence. Understanding like, hey, we can crowdsource some feedback on this and we can collectively deliver a better client experience. And when I find someone who has that type of instinct and they can read the situations well, I'm interested in doubling down on those people. Whereas the strength and conditioning robots who just want to show us how good they are at interpreting the breathing drills we're starting with, they're not even radars up, like antennas up, looking for these types of things. They're just looking for opportunities to demonstrate how smart they are. And that's the opposite of what I need. Because as we discussed pre-call, we can teach people just about anything technically that we need to, but it's difficult to teach people who are closed off to these type of signals to find them. At least it is in my space, because there's just a very distracting, loud, chaotic training environment that we're in. So this conversation is about giving our interns opportunities to show their true colors and watch them interact with people in the office when they walk in, see who walks in with a smile on their face and greets everyone, independent of whether they're one of our clients or not. I love it when an intern finds somebody who says, what are you here for? Oh, I'm waiting for physical therapy. And they're like, oh, that's awesome. Who are you seeing today? That has nothing to do with their day. What practitioner, some person who's on crutches and is not going to be training with us, that conversation, and they make that time to stand and make small talk and say, oh, you're working with Cody? You're going to love Cody. This is great. Well, anyway, I got to head back out. My name's Mark. I'm an intern. That to me is just like gold. And I need to find ways to invest in those people over the course of their internship. So again, not so much action items, but things I look for so that I can figure out where I want to reinvest my energy into the team that we're developing.
I love that you talked about it, Pete, like a radar, because it is like a radar. It's a kind of awareness that can be developed in the same way that you, dear coaches who are listening, who on day one couldn't watch someone do a deadlift from across the room and see from a distance what cues you should probably be giving them. And as you become a better and better coach, you develop this eye, this sense of like, I can read the room and see at a distance what's going on with that person's biomechanics. And I know what coaching cues to give this person that deliver the best kind of results on changes to how they're moving. So you develop that radar over time, and then you develop the toolbox for what to do, how to respond to that radar over time. And, I'll be the nerd and say that I read a bunch of research on emotional intelligence, and it shows that actually emotional intelligence doesn't stop improving over our lifetime. Whereas other kinds of things like intellectual intelligence does seem a little bit more set. It actually levels off over time. And emotional intelligence is something, if invested in, that can continue to grow over time. So it is a radar that can be developed. I'm not saying it's easy. Or I'm not saying as employers developing someone's emotional intelligence is easy. It's got to be something they kind of want to get better at, but it is possible. I'll give you maybe a framework for thinking about this, but there's a guy, Daniel Goleman, who's an American psychologist. He's one of the people who helped popularize the idea of emotional intelligence. And he said there are really kind of 5 elements or pillars to emotional intelligence. We kind of hinted at several of them already. So 1 is self-awareness. 2 is self-regulation. So now that you're aware of how you're showing up, can you change it if you want to?
Right.
There's motivation, right? What's driving you and how in touch are you with what's driving you at any given moment? There's empathy, right? How good are you at putting yourself in other people's shoes? And there's social skills, which is kind of a big bucket. I don't really love that one, but it's, now that you can put yourself in other people's shoes, how do you use that information to navigate social situations? And for each one of those 5 things, we can help develop that in a person. We can help look for that in an interview process, right? And to Mark's point, you're just asking good questions about self-awareness or about empathy, right? Tell me about a time when you really you put yourself in the shoes of another client and it helped you serve them better. Right? Tell me about a time when you were really unmotivated to do a task. What did you do to motivate yourself? Right? All of those kind of questions help get at how do you use emotional information for yourself to change the way you act, and how you use emotional information from other people and change the way you interact with them. So I think, dear listeners, thinking through those 5 pillars and how you're addressing them both in hiring and training could be a good starting point, could be a good basic model. What would you all add to that?
I like that. Did he write Focus? I believe I've read something by Goleman.
I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's one of his.
Among his other books, yes. Focus is one of his books.
Even his messaging.
Yeah. You were going to say something, Fisher. Go ahead.
Yeah, the thing that I was going to share is interesting. First of all, I really do like that model. I don't recall actually seeing it as 5 points before, because historically, I think it was used to be a quadrant model. Is that correct? Like self-awareness, other awareness, self-regulation, not other regulation, but how well do you manage other people's emotions?
Yes, it can be shown like that as well. Honestly, the one that's weird in that five element version of it is the motivation part is the one that stands out, because self-regulation, self-awareness, self-regulation, and then kind of empathy and social skills is meant to be how do you perceive the emotions of others and then use that information to navigate. The motivation one is the one that kind of stands out in this, but it gets added depending on when he's talking about it. But that's just, it's one of many models of emotional intelligence.
I'm sure it's like Boyatzis's model, which I won't go down the rabbit hole, leaders, but listeners, who's listening? You watching? You listening? But yeah, Boyatzis's model was originally the 3 pieces of self-renewal, and then they ultimately added a 4th. So pulling back from the academic stuff, one thing I really just pulled up on my computer because I was like, oh, wait, we do have a model for this I think is useful training. So once we've got them on board, it's interesting because it occurs to me a lot of customer systems and customer service systems, and specifically Mark Fisher Fitness's always and never list, is a way to attempt to manufacture some admittedly top-down emotional intelligence and social skills. Now, ideally, these are things that a very savvy individual would intuitively know how to do, but we've tried to be very explicit about it in the hopes of making very clear what behaviors we're looking for, and specifically identifying examples of things that at first blush don't seem that bad, but then when you really look at them carefully, you begin to say, oh, that actually is not sending the correct message. So as an example, at Mark Fisher Fitness, one of our always is always assume honesty. Never imply that you don't believe the ninja. Always give the benefit of the doubt. We believe that naivete is better than paranoia. So in other words, it's a small misstep, but a meaningful one when you say, oh, so-and-so, great to see you. Listen, I checked with your trainer. You were there after all. So sorry about that. I'll go and return your no-show fee. The suggestion being, I didn't trust you, right? So even though it might feel warm, the message you're sending is one that's like not actually emotionally intelligent or particularly helpful, right? Another example we have is being positive and supportive. So for instance, rather than making a joke to a ninja, be like, oh, you better get in there. If you're 1 minute late, I'm not going to let you in. A feeling of assuming a familiarity and a warmth that isn't earned can inadvertently be a real turnoff. And I think that's one of the things that makes this nuanced in general is admittedly that sort of playful, subversive, ribbing each other bonding, which in certain circumstances can really be a force for creating social cohesion. If unearned, if the person misjudges the situation, can in fact be off-putting. So I won't go through the rest of these. I think we have 9, perhaps it's on here, but we've tried to go through painstaking detail to say, always do this thing. Here's an example, a very nuanced example that looks okay at first, that is a violation of this, and here's specifically the better way to handle this particular facet of good customer service.
Yeah, I think it's a great tool to kind of train the radar, right? To going back to that information. I think that's, I'll just piggyback on that one briefly to say, I would do more of what Pete just demonstrated in the last conversation, which is really reward and encourage conversations about emotional information, right? So you can say, okay, instead of saying, how was your training session with Mrs. Smith today? You can say, how did it feel to train Mrs. Smith today? What was her energy like? Right? What kind of vibes was she giving you? Right? You can use energy, vibes, right? All of that will get people to talk more about emotional information. Even when you're talking about how the business is doing, we can talk about the data and the KPIs and the key metrics and all of that. But we can also have conversations about how does it feel to look at this chart that while looking at, us tanking for the last 3 months. What's it feel like to actually see that we actually have improvement over the last 2 months, right? To just bring emotional information into the conversation more will help train the radar and send a big signal to your team that this is actually part of how we operate best. Is not just use numeric data, but emotional information to actually navigate our business. So I just want to +1 that conversation that you illustrated earlier, Pete, because I thought that was a great example of, we use emotional information to do our job. Yeah.
Well, I'm realizing, listening to you guys talk about it, about how much of a role this plays at our front desk. Actually, there are so many opportunities to resolve potential headaches by demonstrating quality emotional intelligence. And I'll give you an example or two. It's not uncommon for a parent of a young athlete in an environment like ours to walk in next to their little 12, 13-year-old daughter and be even, let's say, into their 3rd week of a 4-week program with us and walk right up to the front desk and be like, who's my daughter with today? Even though we run a semi-private model. And after that first week, we kind of try and shy away from expecting hand-holding every minute of this. And an emotionally unintelligent staff member, or maybe an ill-equipped intern who's filling in, might say, she's in week 3. She doesn't have a coach today, which is the dumbest answer you could possibly give. Because all that parent hears is, no one's watching your kid today.
Right.
Thank you for your money. When what they're trying to say, and they're doing it quite ineffectively, is we run a semi-private model, and she's actually better equipped to handle the environment than you think, and she's great. I've seen her train. But they don't think to say that. Sure. And the answer I always tell them is, come with me. I'm going to walk her out and get her set up with a coach. Yeah. And then I bring her right to the warm-up area, and I say, hey, Sally, grab a foam roller, get started. I'm going to make sure we have a team member come on over right away. And then I walk right up to John, Liz, Ethan, one of my full-timers, and I say, hey, Sally's mom seemed a little unsure. Can we make sure she gets tons of touch points today? And then they're all like, yeah, we got it. And I never hear about it again. But we run the chance on the front end of having a pissed parent because we don't have the awareness to just navigate this well. I'll give you a very different scenario, but another one that sits at the front desk that I've been dealing with as I've been onboarding a new staff member. Person comes in front of you, they give you their credit card, it gets declined and says insufficient funds. And I got people standing in the office. I got staff members over here talking. I got a parent waiting on the couch. I've got another parent working at the conference table. And then new staff member says, hey, that got declined. You didn't have enough money in there. Are you fucking kidding me, man?
Oh, boy.
Have the awareness to say, hey, my system's a little funky. Seems that this one doesn't want to go through. Can we try another one? And having the awareness of the situation to read the room and know, like, part of what we're trying to do is make sure people don't feel exposed in front of strangers. And there are better ways to navigate these conversations. They might happen surrounding money. They might happen surrounding training or competency on the training floor or insecurity surrounding how much weight they're lifting. But we need to think a step beyond our initial gut reaction, which is like, what a stupid question. I'll tell you what this is. No, we need to think about, like, where they may have been uncertain or insecure in asking that question, but they had to anyway, because here they are. And when I see a staff member who does that without coaching, it's wonderful. It's blissful. And I make sure to celebrate it immediately after the fact with them and to their peers in staff meeting after the fact to say, hey, I just want to let everybody know there was an example of this thing I saw today on the training floor or this week on the training floor, And I just want to highlight how much it was seen and how important it is to me that we all practice similar habits. And I know this is a weird roundabout way of saying this is how I think about emotional intelligence, but it seems that there are more opportunities to screw this up at our front desk than anywhere else. But that might just be because I'm not coaching and I don't realize what I'm missing up there.
I think you're really onto something, Pete. I think the other thing that happens in a lot of training gyms is the front desk classically is undertrained, underpaid, underage. That quite often this very important role in the business, which is this very unique opportunity. It's the first experience when they come in. It's the last experience when they go out. Importantly, it's also the person, unlike the coach, who's going to get grief if there are issues, right? Which is an interesting dynamic where you're going to get all the whole quadrants going. Are they aware of how they feel? Are they able to control the response they're having in the face of this person yelling? Are they able to accurately assess what's going on with this person? Can they manage and use their social skills to influence this person in a positive way to bring their temperature down? I think it's a really great point and a challenge in a lot of training gyms is the front desk role is actually crucial to have this kind of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, well said. Well, let me try and wrap this up because I think, we covered a lot of ground here, and I think I'll wrap it up maybe with one suggestion inspired by this conversation for what you, dear listeners, can go do next. And I think one first step, if you want to tackle this a little bit more, is to find some scenarios in your business where you think you would like to see more emotional intelligence being used, more ability to read the cues, read the room, anticipate people's needs, see what's going on below the surface, what's not being spoken in this moment, and see if you can write down some scenarios and then practice them in team meetings.
Yes.
Train for the behaviors that you want to see, right? And just get in the reps of having a conversation about what to do when a credit card declines. Have the conversation about what to say when you see someone walk in that looks like they're having a shitty day. Have the conversation that says, when someone looks really disappointed at the end of their session, how do you address it, right? And on the flip side, all the positive ways. How do we celebrate people? How do we acknowledge really great performance? So I think, as an action step, dear listeners, go make a list of all the situations in your business, internally with your clients during the hiring process where you want to see more emotional intelligence being used, and then practice them. Actually build systems around what the behaviors are that you want to see more of. I think that's a great idea that I think was inspired really by our conversation today. Anything y'all would add to that in the spirit of closing up shop here?
I just need to go do that. Because I take a reactionary approach to teaching in this sense. And here I am in my office. My door is closed because people know we're recording and they're kind of not enough not to disrupt. But when we finish, I'll open my door far enough for me to hear what's going on. And I have a lot of moments where I pop out of my seat to quickly go resolve issues and act like I just happened to be walking by. And they're all things where on my way from my desk to resolving that issue, I think to myself, I should have made that list Michael was just talking about and just meeting recently, but here I am again doing it in real time and not actually coaching, just hoping people learn through osmosis. And this one's on me.
Yeah, great, awesome. And I also just made a note while we were talking. I'll do a little solo podcast, my moments with Michael, about training for emotional intelligence, because there's a lot of actual tips and techniques I think I can offer with more time for how people actually improve someone's emotional intelligence, whether it's yours or people that you're working with. So more information on this topic to come, dear listeners. But thanks, gents. Thanks for doing this. Great conversation. Listeners, if you want to give us some feedback, please leave us a review. Give us some stars. Give us all the stars. We've earned all the stars today. And if you want to hear some other topics, email us. Just Michael, Pete, or Mark at businessunicorns.com. Let us know what you want us to talk about. Ask us some questions, and we'll address them on the podcast. Thanks, gents. See you on the next one.
Talk soon, gentlemen.
Bye. Hi again. I want to remind you about an awesome free resource we created for gym owners. Have you ever found yourself overwhelmed in your gym? Just not sure where to put your efforts to get to the next level? Well, head to gymownerreportcard.com and you can access a totally free assessment that will help you identify exactly where to focus your efforts so you can get crystal clear on the next best steps to create the gym of your dreams. One more time, that's gymownerreportcard.com.